This podcast is a part of the Local Government Podcast Network, where we give local governments a voice.
Welcome to the Building Amazing Cities and Towns podcast, the podcast for mayors, council members, managers, staff, and anyone who is interested in building an amazing city. Your host is Jim Hunt, the author of Bottom Line Green, How American Cities Are Saving the Planet and Money Too, and his latest book, The Amazing City, 7 Steps to Creating an Amazing City. Jim is also the former president of the National League of Cities, 27-year mayor, council member, and 2006 Municipal Leader of the Year by American City and County Magazine. Today, Jim speaks to thousands of local government officials each year in the U.S. and abroad. Jim also consults with businesses that are bringing technology and innovation to local government. Jim, I'm really excited to talk about Zing today. Thanks for joining us, and let's start with just a quick definition of Zing and maybe even a few examples.
Well, Matt, I'm happy to be here again. I stayed up late last night, just excited about the possibility of doing this episode, because this is one I think that probably brings more value to people, and once they do it right, it can be the basis, the foundation for building an amazing city. When I started and decided that I was going to outline my book using the word amazing, and I started coming up with the topics and the titles for each letter of the word amazing, when I got to Z, it really was, I had a writer's block, and I was just really struggling to think, what is it about, what does the Z signify in a city? So then I thought back and I thought, well, amazing is what, it's an amazing city. And then it hit me that the zing, and it has a good ring to it, I think, but the zing is the thing that in any group of items, there's something that catches your eye, it catches the excitement, it gets you excited talking about it. And it's the one item, when I do workshops for cities around the country, we go through this, and this is, I have to tell you, it's the most fun section. It's the one that really hits for people, where they look at it and say, this was the most fun that we had during the entire presentation. But the zing, when you describe it, what is it? Well, it's that thing that stands your city or town out from maybe every other city in the world. I'll give you an example. I was down at a little town in West Virginia called Hundred, and it was actually where my dad grew up. And Hundred, West Virginia, I went down, did a little work with the city officials. They'd had a very tragic flood there a few years ago, and devastated. It flooded the city hall and pretty well destroyed a lot of the downtown and areas of the city. So when we were at the meeting, I was talking to the mayor and the council and a few of the people that came to the meeting, and we started talking about building the zing in your community. And I said, what's the one thing in Hundred that is unique, that it stands out from every other town in America? And they probably were one of the towns that that came up with it quicker than any other town that I've dealt with. And they said, do you realize that the town of Hundred, there is not another town in the world named Hundred? Now, isn't that something?
Yeah, you would think a town like that would be one to struggle to find something, and it was right there in their name.
Yeah, and so we started brainstorming, and I said, well, what can we do with this? Is there something we can do? And they said, and I said, it just so happened that that week I was reading some demographics about the fastest growing age demographic in the country. And do you know what that is?
I have no idea.
It's people that are reaching the age of 100. It's
really,
yeah, and it's the fastest growing because, in many ways, healthcare, people have had better healthcare. There's more supportive services, hospitals, and so forth, so that people now, and I have an aunt that's 102, and my mother's 96. So I guess, in that demographic, there's more and more people that you see. It used to be just no one ever heard of somebody that was 100, or very rarely. Now there's so many reaching that age. So we talked to the 100 City Council and to the mayor about maximizing the identity, and some of the ideas that we came up with, of which we started out with a community struggling with recovery from this flooding. And we came out just in that little work session of maybe identifying that if people would, that they would be honorary citizens of 100 West Virginia if they reached 100. So that would be a gift, because most people, and I know most people when they reach 100, they pretty well got everything they need. So, finding a gift would be something that would be kind of unusual. But we started to brainstorm that they could have these nice certificates made up, honorary citizen of 100 West Virginia. And for that, the family or the people, you would charge maybe, you don't know, maybe $250. It's like, I know, you buy a star in the galaxy or something for several dollars, but whatever that is. So what they started thinking about, they were struggling. But then all of a sudden they started brainstorming on this and their ideas. They were saying, well, wait, we could host the day where we could invite people that are 100 to come to 100 West Virginia. So that's an idea a little bit about the way that I work with cities and try and dig in and come up with the zing in the community.
So zing is that thing that makes you stand out, that you're known for, almost like your brand. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think branding is one of the biggest trends in local government today. The cities and towns that understand proper branding and how to do it are the ones that are amazing, and they're growing and attracting new residents and businesses into their community. And the ones that And it's kind of, I don't know, it gets me sometimes, is that I see things and I'm wondering why they're not maximizing such a valuable brand. And so a little deeper dive into the zing is that what used to be, looking back on, let's say with automobiles, when Ford Motor Company or Buick or General Motors, whatever, it used to be that you knew, you could picture in your mind what a Ford Galaxy car looked like. You could picture in your mind what a Mercedes-Benz looked like. But as time has gone on with the way things have evolved, I don't know that, you could drive along the street and see, I drive into a parking lot sometimes and I park my white SUV in a line of cars and come out and I'm looking at 8 different cars before I find mine, because the generic nature of that is becoming more and more common. But the one thing that has that brand identification that's been, it's on a map. Just think that if someone said to you, Matt, your business, it needs to be on a map, that's hard to do. And the beauty of this is that cities and towns already have this logical branding that they can do. But they have to figure out how to maximize it. That's, I think, the key. When you identify that zing of what it is that's unique, and today the thing when we talk about businesses relocating to communities and residents and people coming, in my this week my granddaughter Avery wrote a column over Thanksgiving I do a weekly column on amazing cities, and she came up with the I asked her if she'd like to be the guest columnist, and she said she would. So she picked this out herself. It was cities with weird names. And so when she did it, there's so many unusual cities out there with these unusual names. And it was funny to me that this is something that you can use it as a negative or as a positive. One of the cities that's out there in these weird names is I think it's Boring, Idaho. So if you were trying to attract a business or residents to a place called Boring, Idaho, that might be tough unless you turn that around and turn that into a positive, and you start making catchy taglines. And, when life gets boring, you've found a new home. Or when your business is whatever, and you start to play around with it. Now, what you might find is that that's not something you want to focus on. However, when when the exercise itself, it's just as important, I think, sometimes for cities to understand what they don't want their brand to be as much as what they do. And let me give you an example. Many cities, because of historic things, they always, the easiest thing is to fall back on, we're the birthplace of, Abraham Lincoln or some president or some famous person or whatever. And that becomes the easiest, but it has very little attraction. Do you get that? Do you understand where I'm going?
Yeah, absolutely. It's commonplace, and there's not many of them to be had either.
Yeah,
you gotta have that famous person from your town if you do.
Well, and so you look at it and you're thinking in terms of creating excitement and energy and all. I don't know that a 150-year-old ex-president that's long gone and half the people couldn't pick his picture out of a lineup, that using that as your brand to attract high-tech companies, to attract young families, millennials and Gen Xers, to say, I want to come to this community to set to live and to raise my family and run a business. I don't know that that's the zing you want. Now, maybe it is, but I don't know that that's the one. And I think the other thing about identifying the zing is that this needs to be a community process. This is not something that, the mayor and council or the Chamber of Commerce, they just get in a room and say, hey, we need a new brand or new slogan or this or that. Let's just do it and throw it out and see what happens. Because what you want it to be that people adopts it. And let me give you the one, Clemson, South Carolina. And Matt, what do you, when you think of their zing, what would it be?
Oh, I think of their football team almost instantly.
Yeah, and I was down at Clemson a couple of years ago doing a keynote speech for the Town Gown, the International Town Gown Association. And we were down at Clemson and happened to know the president of Clemson, Jim Clements, who used to be, I used to work with him in a past occasion in West Virginia. But Dr. Clements moved to Clemson. And when he left West Virginia University, I was wondering, I thought, why are you going to Clemson, South Carolina, never having been there? Well, I have to tell you, one trip to Clemson, and I saw President Clements when I was down there. I shook his hand and I said, I see why you came. This is an amazing city. So here's what's happened in Clemson. Obviously, when you have and Clemson's not that big a city. I think a lot of times people gets the idea that, when you hear college football team that's number one wins a national championship and you see all the pictures and so forth, you get the idea that it's 150,000 population. And Clemson, I think, is around 20,000, if that. And so in essence, the school is kind of the big attraction there. And it goes back, and Clemson had this discussion about finding their zing many years ago. Previous mayor in Clemson said, I want to make Clemson that you will not be able to distinguish when you leave the city of Clemson and go onto the campus of Clemson University. And that was, this fellow was a genius, because what he did was took the zing, the thing that people, it's on national television, you've got all this exposure for your brand. And what they did, when I was in Clemson and I drove around the downtown, and I'll ask you, Matt, what's the color you're going to see in Clemson, South Carolina?
Oh, you got orange and purple everywhere.
Yeah, and so it was. And what's the mascot?
The Tigers.
The Tigers. See, and this is something. I bet I could go. I wouldn't have to dig too deep before I'd come up and say, "Hey, what's the mascot for the Ohio University school?" And I don't know it myself, so you could say
you
anything.
Got me on that one, yeah.
I just the reason I said that, I just met the mayor, and what's this? I'm not sure. I'm blanking on the city where Ohio University is located, and he's a fantastic
I've got a friend that went there too, and I still don't know.
Yeah, and it's unbelievable. It's it's got its own zing, but we'll go back to Clemson. But when you go to Clemson, just think all over the country, you can ask people, what's the colors? And they identify the Clemson orange and the purple. What's the mascot? The Clemson Tiger. So what the city has done is that the businesses, the chamber, and everyone, their colors that you see in downtown, you see stores that have the Clemson colors. You see they sell T-shirts and memorabilia and all of that, and that adds to the value of that downtown. Usually a college has its bookstore that sells that, but in Clemson you can buy Clemson T-shirts and other memorabilia all over the downtown. The other thing they did, and this is kind of that digging into the brand, is that I'm driving around and I'm looking on the street and the sidewalks, and what do you think's stenciled onto the streets and the sidewalks?
I'm going to guess the little paw print.
The tiger paws. So you're driving along and you're looking around and you say, my goodness, this is amazing. So that's an example of a town that in many cities, and the idea with this International Town Gown Association that I work with, I've spoke to them several times. I was with them down in San Antonio just a couple weeks ago. But there's so many towns and cities that fight the local university or the local college, that there's a friction between the city and the town. That's why, or the school and the town, because that's why they have this International Town Gown Association to bring people together and talk about this. But just think, Clemson, South Carolina has maximized their zing, and instead of, here's Clemson University here and the city's over here, we want to be known for our, famous hot dogs or something. They've been able to maximize, and Clemson, the town of Clemson, South Carolina, is one of the most beautiful communities and a place that people want to go. So that's the example of a zing that a city has used very effectively. But there's a couple of examples there, but let me ask you, it sounds like it might be kind of difficult to identify. Well, and that's the idea. And that's kind of the point of why I put it in the book and why I gave examples and talked about different things. And just like on the podcast today, of trying to dig in and show that process, because it's really the identification of the zing is really the process of identifying the zing and then figuring out how you maximize that brand, if you will, so that the goal of this is that you can go anywhere and you're going to say, I'm from Talladega, Alabama. And what pops into your mind?
You got the Speedway.
Yeah, and you and I haven't talked about this. This.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why it's effective.
I'm getting a little nervous that you're going to ask me one and I'm going to miss it, but
well, and I'll give you one that you'll miss for sure. But I'll show you how this little town in Illinois has done a great job. But when you think of something like a Talladega, just think if I, and I work, with cities, and let's say that the city of Talladega called me and says, Jim, we want to be amazing. We'd like you to come in and do a workshop for our community. Just think, if you can picture me going to Talladega, and I start out the meeting and I say, okay, let's talk about Talladega, and let's find the zing in this community. Well, give me some thoughts and ideas from the audience and all. I don't think that there's any question that people might say, you know what, by golly, the racetrack seems like what everybody recognizes us for, and so that begins the discussion. But I've also gone to communities where, they come up with something that, number one, I haven't heard of. Before I go into a city to work, I research it and check their websites. I go onto the chamber. I go on to all of the various Googling that you can do. And I usually will know, and I've got an idea of, here's a list of things that I kind of just popped out, that hit me that ought to be in the discussion. But I always want them to tell me, to see if they're, sometimes you don't see the forest for the trees. And that it's surprising when you say, is it difficult to identify? It's a very specific process. It's not something that happens overnight. It has to be nurtured and like any branding. And I've been in organizations. The National League of Cities did a rebranding in the last, I think, about 3 or 4 years. And it might be interesting, just give you an example. The National League of Cities, they had a logo. And one of the things that, when I was president of the National League of Cities back in 2005, one of the things that small towns and cities used to constantly come up to me, because I was from a small town, one of the smallest ever to be president of the National League of Cities. And they looked at the logo and they said there was 3 circles, and at each one of them were pretty much identical, but they had skyscrapers in the 3 circles, and it said NLC, National League of Cities. And I had so many people come up and they pointed to my lapel pin and they said, you know what the problem with this organization is? And I said, what? I'm president. I'm thinking, oh man, why are you telling me this stuff? And they said, I'm not on your logo. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, this doesn't look like an organization that's for me, because you have all these big city skyscrapers in your logo and I'm not there. So the National League of Cities undertook a branding exercise to be able to figure out, how do we become more inclusive, which is something we'll talk in a future episode, but how do we, properly brand the organization to grow? And that's kind of the other thing, is that, what some communities are known for, historically, it might get a little stale. It might get, outdated. It might be that, the only people that knows about it is somebody that is 100 years old, and you can't, it's hard to build a brand off of something that's not identifiable. But that process is one that it's an exciting process for a community, because I guarantee you one thing. After undergoing the process, you will be a better community. I can't guarantee that you'll be amazing, but you will be a better community for that exercise, because you start to dig in and find out what the community, what the chamber, what the city council, what the citizens are thinking. And when they come up with their ideas, you might find, how out of touch you are, or in some cases where people are kind of, you go into some cities where they've been hit with a factory closure or different things like this. I mean, let's use an example. Akron, Ohio. Akron is one of my favorite cities. And when you think of Akron, Matt, I'll throw it out to you. What do you think of?
Oh, I think of, I don't think of much, to be honest. There's nothing that jumps into my mind with Akron.
Well, and I'll say this. For me, as a little bit older than you, Akron signified the Goodyear Rubber Company and the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. When you went to Akron, you literally could not go anywhere without seeing they have the huge tire there that was Goodyear and, rubber capital of the world and so forth. Now, Akron today is reinventing itself. They're doing some very innovative things. They have a minor league ballpark in the downtown. They're putting in the Akron, University of Akron is building student housing and other housing in the downtown. They've started to rebuild the downtown and attract new businesses in. But a couple other things they've done, which I thought was just fantastic. There was a couple vacant lots in the downtown of Akron, and they turned them into sand volleyball courts. And outside of the minor league baseball stadium, and I was there just as a visitor observing, and started seeing this, and I thought, man alive, here's Akron decided we want to be a more college-centric community. We want to have a more vibrant downtown. We want to have more family activities for their residents and all. So they decided, to maximize this and to focus on it. And instead of having vacant lots, they brought in truckloads of sand, put up a few nets and that, a very inexpensive thing. And yet here I am talking about it. I was there, I think that was 2 or 3 years ago. And it stuck out to me when I saw those sand volleyball courts and I saw this group of young people playing volleyball and I saw the people going to the ball game. I saw, a little food trucks and things of that sort. I just had a good feeling about Akron. And you're thinking, that didn't happen by accident. Someone thought, this might be something that will attract the demographic and the folks that we want when they're thinking of relocating their business or moving their family. We want them to think they can have some fun in Akron. So the rubber capital of the world doesn't mean much to a lot of millennials and Gen Xers, but going to a place that has a university, they have a ballpark, they have volleyball courts and things like that in the downtown. That's the zing. And I think when you focus in on that, you can start to see that the zing sometimes it gets stale. It sometimes, matures into something that's not, attractive. And then you have to revisit it. So it's a constant of evolution, and it might change. But I would say this, if a city seriously dives in to identifying their zing, they will be better for it. And I would encourage any city that is, and here's the other irony, is that when I get called to come to a city and work with them on identifying their zing or branding or just kind of the reinvention of a city, those are the cities that are the easiest to work with. It's like, people that go to the doctor and regularly go to a doctor for a checkup are the healthier people in society. The people that never that have bad habits, that do bad things, and then they avoid the doctor. So when I'm called by someone who already has decided they want to be better, they want to be amazing, and they've already done some things that have some impact on making my job easier. And sometimes that's what, like I say, every once in a while, my pro bono work that I do on behalf of Amazing Cities is that I'll go to 100 West Virginia. I'll go to a community that's struggling or having, some serious issues and work with them and just, try and give them the tools that, that they may want to use. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't, but.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like almost having the process that you've done this multiple times. You know how to get the community involved. You know how to get the leaders of the community involved, the elected officials involved, and also bring that outside set of eyes that you may recognize something that they've been doing for years, and they don't even realize how special it is, how unique it is, how much zing is in it.
Absolutely. And to close, kind of to wrap things up, Matt, one of the things, the trends that I'm seeing around the country and around the world, and this is worth, this is worth the price of the book or the price of the podcast or anything else. But here's what I've been noticing. I was up in Ottawa, Canada, been down out in Boulder, Colorado. I was over in Prague 2 years ago. So here's what's happening. Cities are, in addition to identifying their zing, they're promoting it. So, and when you talk about a brand, and like we talked, Talladega. So if you go, so let's just picture it. If you go to a community, to a city, you take your family, you're enjoying the downtown of a city. It's just fantastic. You've probably had the best time in that city on that weekend as a resident or as a visitor. And you're trying to memorialize it the some way. So if you're in Chicago, one of the more prominent zings that Chicago has, Chicago has multiple, but the Big Egg, and you're familiar with that, aren't you,
Yeah,
Matt?
yeah, absolutely.
Now, and maybe somebody who hasn't been to Chicago or doesn't, but Google it. It's the Big Egg in Millennial Park. It's this huge stainless steel egg that when you say it, you're like, or bean. I think it's a bean more than an egg. So you walk up to it, it's huge, and it reflects, and you get these unbelievable photos there that reflects back in this little distorted, kind of like one of these carnival mirror type of thing. But when you take the picture of it, number one, you take a picture and standing in front of it, and when you take that, immediately people knows you're in Chicago.
Yep.
But what's happening now, so if you go into a small town and like I say, you have an unbelievable time, it's just fantastic. You need to figure out a place that people can come and take a picture that identifies your community. And do you get why I'm focusing on that?
Yeah. To me, it leads right into posting that photo on Instagram or Facebook and tagging all your friends saying, I'm in 100 West Virginia, look at this, whatever the zing is.
Exactly. And here's the power. And this is what did not exist 20 years ago. It just didn't. I don't know that it existed 10 years ago. But right today, as people travel, as people go to different places and all, people are always, number one, you're always looking for some fun place to go on a weekend or for a vacation and so forth. In some cases, you're looking, a business person is looking, being on the lookout, I want to find that new place where the costs are a little bit lower, but I know it's going to grow and be a fantastic business location. So, constantly people go to meetings, conferences, and things of this sort, and all of a sudden, and then their networks, it's not unusual for someone who's just a casual social media person to have 1,000 friends and acquaintances and so forth. Now, when you think, if you're in Clemson, South Carolina, and you take a picture at a park, and it's just the generic green park, and there's no signage, there's no identification, and you say, you just have pictures of your kids and this and that, it really doesn't maximize the brand. If you have a picture of these, now a lot of cities are going with those ones, like in Ottawa, they're probably 6 or 8 foot letters that spell out Ottawa. They're painted in different kind of a neat modern art type effect. And literally you can stand in the O for Ottawa and all, and it just makes it a memorable. And when you take that picture standing in the O for Ottawa, pretty much you don't have to tag it. People knows exactly where you are. And they also get the sense this is a place that's fun. So if you're thinking of going someplace, you're like, I don't know, Ottawa keeps popping into my head, or Clemson, or Rock Hill, South Carolina. And I'll give you an example, Rock Hill. I think Rock Hill, and I travel to hundreds of cities every year. I travel all over the world. Rock Hill has something that stands out, and I mention him a lot. My good friend, Mayor Doug Eccles, who is no longer mayor, but had a 24-year career as mayor and really did an amazing job in Rock Hill. But they built the most beautiful city entrance signs of anywhere that I've seen. And you're coming up Interstate 77 and you look there and it says, welcome to the city of Rock Hill, South Carolina. And that's amazing. It just, you're thinking this must be the greatest city in the world because of the way they're brick and they're very well done. It's manicured landscaping and so forth. So those are the type of things that cities now, with your brand and your zing, you have to sell it. If your zing in Roswell, New Mexico is what is it, Area 51, right?
Yeah.
I haven't done this. I didn't do this in preparation of this. But I guarantee if we Google Roswell, New Mexico, you're going to see Area 51 on that city's website.
Sure.
You're going to see it on the Chamber's website. You're going to see it on social media and so forth. And there's probably going to be, without me knowing, I'm almost sure though, there's going to be stores in downtown Roswell that have alien themes. There's going to be, and hopefully in Roswell, they've figured out we're going to have a signage that says Area 51, here in Roswell, New Mexico, so people can take the picture. Now, I'd point out, make sure this is strategic. Make sure that you don't, like I mentioned, Rock Hill's entry signs. They're beautiful, but you can't stop your car and stand in front of it without probably being arrested.
Right.
So if you're looking to maximize your brand, there's not a lot of people taking pictures of your entry signs to the city. Might be a few, but not near as many as will take them downtown where there's a space to park, where there's a sign, a green space, the sign is there. It encourages people. It might be near a playground or a play structure, things of that sort. Make it strategic where it will say the name of the community. I have a hobby that when I visit a city, I take a picture in front of the city hall just because of, I thought, my company is Amazing Cities. I want to have these pictures, and I post a lot of them on social media and on my website. But I'm surprised at how many cities do not have a place where you could take a picture that would signify, all they say, I have hundreds of pictures that say City Hall. It doesn't say Reno City Hall or that, it just says City Hall. And I think strategically, you got to start looking at putting your name, your brand, a slogan, in places where people will be taking these social media pictures, where it'll show up in news stories, it'll show up on the social media threads and on LinkedIn for businesses and all. So that's kind of that idea of how do you maximize the zing. That requires sometimes, depending on the size of the community and the budgets and the energy around it, a lot of this stuff can be done very inexpensively. But I will say this, branding, Bob's Used Cars with a sign on a piece of plywood spray painted with a can of paint from Lowe's is not as effective as the person who takes the time to invest money into that. And so sometimes cities, I've found, they'll say, well, we're going to do it on the cheap. And I would say if you're investing in your websites, if you're investing in your communication tools, as you well know, Matt, many cities are developing podcasts and getting that brand out. But that's an investment in the future and in selling that brand. And I can tell you, with the power of technology today, there are small towns in America and around the world that are attracting huge number of visitors. Gander, Newfoundland, it's a Broadway play. It was the place where the planes were diverted in 9/11. Gander is just a tiny, tiny little town, as was exemplified in the play. But they have become this major tourist place because of all this branding that they got through their hospitality and kindness during 9/11. So you got to, they're doing the job of taking advantage of the branding and this, of being at this tourist attraction of people now know Gander, Newfoundland, that didn't have any idea before. But those are the things about Zing that's exciting. I think it's something that when you understand it and see the power, and hopefully today's episode, I'm so thrilled with it, Matt, and I appreciate you kind of prompting it along. This can make your community. This can be something that you'll just be thinking, man alive, I wish we did this 10 years ago. But I'm going to use a quote maybe to close our session today, is that I heard this one about a Chinese proverb of when's the best time to plant a tree? And that's 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And for cities and towns that are struggling or maybe prospering and thinking, how do we maximize this benefit that we have? Now's the time to do it. Don't wait. Do it right. Invest some money into it. It's more inexpensive today to get your brand out there, to get your Zing into the world. And you might just go viral. You never know.
Absolutely. Well, you hit several things that'll sum up before we close out, is putting the strategy in place. So it's not just this would be it. And the president that was born here, having some strategy, utilizing the technology and the social media. You mentioned the ease of podcasts, maximizing that. The ideas behind it are all fantastic ideas, and you go into more detail in the book, which is a great resource for anybody that wants to dive deeper into it. So any last thoughts before we close up?
Well, I think this is, I'm so thrilled today. This is fantastic. I think this is one of our best episodes so far. And I think this is an amazing way to get information out through the podcast world now. And it's growing every day. And I'm just so thrilled that all of the support that we've gotten, we've had a lot of comments, a lot of interaction. So I'm thrilled with it. And I hope the listeners today took some real value out of this.
Very good. We'll be back next episode with another letter in Amazing. We go into the I. And if you enjoyed this podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you would drop a review on Apple or any of the podcast services that you use. Share it on social media. It's such a big part of the world today. And make sure that you subscribe as well so that you don't miss a single episode. And if you would like to learn more, we've got a special gift for you. It's the 10 steps to revitalize your downtown. It's a free white paper for those interested in making their own town or city amazing. You can grab your copy instantly at www.amazingcities.org. And again, until next time, here's to making yours an amazing city. If you enjoyed this podcast, we'd appreciate it if you'd leave a review, share on social media, and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And if you'd like to learn more, we have a special gift for you called the 10 Steps to Revitalize Your Downtown. It's a free white paper for those interested in making their city or town amazing. Grab your free copy instantly at amazingcities.org. Until next time, here's to making yours an amazing city.
This has been the Amazing Cities Podcast, a production of the Local Government Podcast Network, your choice for local government podcasting. For more information on services of the Local Government Podcast Network, please visit www.localgovpodcasts.com.